It's my honor to welcome Andrea Woolverton to Very Interesting. We're going to be discussing how Andrea got from a farm girl here in Malden, Missouri, all the way to Leon, Nicaragua. But first, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
It's really my pleasure to have you. I've heard so much about you from your dad, Gerald. You're well-traveled, and we're going to get into that. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family.
Well, I think the farm girl part of me never left, and it's been a big driver throughout all of these years. But so I'm from Malden. I was born and raised here. Grandparents here. Now my dad is from Gideon, and so there's always this discussion about how we should have been living out in the country in Gideon. I worked right here in this plant for the summer before I went to Mizzou, and I went to the University of Missouri, and from then on I just kept going. My husband, Colin, who I met a little bit later in Iceland, he's from Minneapolis, and so we live in Nicaragua with our daughter Lucille, and so she's 6.
Can't imagine Gerald as a grandpa.
Yeah.
So let's get into, you went to college at Mizzou, right? Mm-hmm. You got your bachelor's degree there?
Mm-hmm. And Ph.D.
So you did accelerated entry from bachelor's to Ph.D., or you got your master's there too?
No, so I was going to be a veterinarian.
You still can be.
Right? I know. I think there's a statute of limitations. So I went in at the time. I was going to be a physical therapist, and then wanted to move in and got interested by a freshman class in economics and agricultural economics. And he said, yeah, we can do this thing. You can take all the pre-vet, pre-med courses and still do agribusiness, agricultural economics. And so I did. I was there on a scholarship. So I'm a product of public investment. And from then, I did not go to vet school. I remember thinking it was $80,000 at the time. I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. And I received an assistantship to go to Ohio State, actually, in healthcare administration. And almost at the end of it, I received I don't know if it was a phone call or an email back then, but from a professor named Mike Cook, who's a cooperatives expert, and he had received a USDA National Needs Fellowship these were fellowships that were coming out of DC to just generally improve the number of agribusiness experts out there. And so he said it has international money to do it and come back, and I didn't even know what a PhD was, but I decided that I did it. So that's how I ended up back in Missouri.
So you said, gee, do I want to go back home and chop cotton all summer or go back to school, right?
Right.
So you were going to be a vet, you're going to be a physical therapist, which is a common journey for a college student, right? I mean, I'm still trying to decide what I want to do when I grow up. Obviously, I haven't decided yet. I'm doing this, but you became a USDA economist, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about that. How long you were a USDA economist?
Well, I first went into the Foreign Agriculture Service, which was an odd spot for someone coming out, but I had always thought I wanted to work internationally marketing U.S. agriculture products. And so I went over, but I ended up working on WTO negotiations. So I spent a lot of time in Geneva. I ended up in policy. And while it was very interesting, I was not marketing, and moved over to the Economic Research Service. And so I was there about 3 years, and while I was at ERS, I was able to, and also FAS, but I was able to train with so many amazing economists with tons of experience. And I started doing a lot of, so farm policy, domestic policy was one of my areas, and the Farm Bill and analyzing, and as well as a lot of work on supermarkets internationally in developing countries. And I remember going into my advisor and just saying, I really like to know where things come from. And I was always reading all the packages, I guess the cereal boxes. And so I was sitting at ERS, and I was doing lots of interesting research. And
where did you live at?
DC.
Then? Okay.
Yeah, so I was in DC, and also got a knock on the door that said there was an opportunity with the United Nations, with the Food and Agriculture Organization.
That sounds really cool. That sounds really important for a farm girl from Malden to be a part of the United Nations. So tell us about that.
So it was fascinating. I think at every it ended up just feeling kind of like you were building on one to the other. And wow. So it's the Food and Agriculture Organization. And
that was still DC?
No, Rome, Italy.
Oh.
So about that time, I guess Colin, we just got married. So we moved to Rome.
When you moved to Rome, or was it pretty much no big deal for you?
It was culture shock in a lot of different ways, like how you expected to be treated at the post office. I mean, what I'm finding, it's been about 11 years or so since I've lived in the US full time, and it's mostly about expectations. And you don't realize how much of your expectations are about where you're born. Not about something intrinsic to you. It's just, you've been taught this is how it is, and your expectations are formed. And so it was things like that. Coffee, for example, you get taught it's one way, and you're having an espresso on the counter. And I think also hierarchy. It's a very hierarchical organization and bureaucratic, more so than the U.S. government.
You were climbing a bureaucratic ladder at that time.
Yeah, and an international one, which I just had no idea. But when I was working, what I was actually doing was mostly purely primary research. I had this amazing opportunity to work in sub-Saharan Africa and design a research program and just go after trying to understand what's happening with, it was actually corn farmers in Kenya, and as well as youth. I did all kinds of case studies of trying to figure out why youth weren't going into agriculture and what urbanizing consumers needed.
And you were doing this from your home base in Rome?
Yeah, but I was going. So I was
traveling a lot.
Yeah, I was traveling a lot, to East and West Africa. And in West Africa, I did more about consumers. In my PhD program, I did a pretty cool research project between South Africa and Missouri, interviewing and trying to isolate press risk management. When you hold policy, trying to figure out what the policy impacts are. So I also spent, that was probably the big eye-opener with South Africa.
Which is very important in all farmers' lives right now, all the time, their whole career.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your duties were mainly research-oriented. You were doing research projects when you're living in Rome.
Right. So I was traveling and doing research and then writing it up and policy recommendations. So I was very much saying, okay, I found this, and here's what, because you're trying to ultimately eliminate poverty.
Tell me one thing that you feel like your research, you made a difference in that country's livelihood. Tell me about one of your research projects that really meant a lot to you because it made a difference in the lives of someone else.
Oh, wow. So someone else could talk about it maybe. Well, I think that it's interesting because it carries on into the coffee, but especially when I was going around in Kenya and I was putting together, it was a comprehensive project, and I was trying to shift how people talk about decision making in agriculture, because we were talking about women and men, and that was all just clumped in together, and people were not doing the hard stuff where you have to sit down and invest a lot of time talking. And so I was shifting how you ask people to really try to get into the decision making so you can understand, and sitting down and talking with youth. And I think it was some of the first times they had been asked questions, and people trying to spend some time trying to understand what was going on. Like, what are your opportunities? Why is it difficult to becoming a farmer? Because there's no safety nets in many countries that we may feel used to here. And so I think being heard, I mean, there were a lot of recommendations and over time, but I think it's this being heard, somebody is caring about what's going on in my world, and because most people feel a bit forgotten when they're out there.
You've had a very storied career, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. It's awesome. A local girl has traveled the world and made a difference in a lot of people's lives, and thank you for that. But tell us about the decision you and your husband made to start your own company. It's called Twin Engine Coffee. Your dad's told me about it at least 100 times. He forced me to get on your website. I signed up for the website, and it's very, very, very awesome website. Whose idea was this? Did you and your husband wake up one day and said, okay, I'm not going to work for the U.S. government anymore, we're going to own our own business?
Well, so the thing is, for me, in a mission way, it just is an extension of what I was doing. I mean, what was happening at the UN is that I mean, you could do a Google search. Everybody says value added, value added. If you're in agriculture, I mean, there's popcorn. It's so obvious. If you're going to grow, you have to add value. And so what was happening is I was doing all these interviews in supermarkets, and why are you not seeing more local products? And because you were effectively, everything was being exported raw and then re-imported some lower quality version. So Ghana, for example, has some of the best cacao in the world, and you're eating, well, it'd be a British bar, but you know, a commercial, mediocre chocolate bar in country, or you're in Kenya drinking instant coffee. And so it was really shocking to me. And everything I said was, you have to invest into the mom and pop. Like, we know that's how that, I mean, I think it's intuitive for people around here. So it just wasn't happening. And it's because there's this kind of top down, it's hard to invest in mom and pops, because like the UN would invest through a large company, and let's say a Walmart, and they're going to do a project, and that just doesn't lend itself to investing in small businesses, because the small businesses aren't set up to be in these projects, et cetera, et cetera. Long story. So I just kept thinking, I should do this. At the time, Colin, he's a very big personality as well, and normally when you go up through the UN or the Foreign Ag Service, the spouse just kind of has to go with the flow. And I'm thinking, I don't know. If we go with the flow, we may not ever live together. And
which Colin has a very storied career too. We'll get into that some other time.
Yeah. So he's an economist also, and very entrepreneurial. I was thinking I said very, Miss Rashford, kill me. And so my parents also never had bosses. Now I've come to learn it's probably because they could have never worked for anybody. But I was kind of feeling maybe the same way about myself. And he was talking about Nicaragua because he knew Nicaragua and a lot of Central America, and he was helping me visualize this a bit more. I was thinking, well, this is the obvious thing to do. So coffee producing countries all of the value is leaving, and it's being added where the coffee is consumed, which would be here. And the quality is mediocre, and it seemed like this huge opportunity to go in and do it. And so we did. And so it was really about that, thinking that it was an extension of what we were doing.
And what year was that you decided to move to Nicaragua and start this?
2012.
So you've been at it a long time then.
Yeah, with a lot of this.
9 years, which is normal for almost any entrepreneur to go up and down many times. So how did you settle on coffee though? This is your brand of coffee we're looking at, Twin Engine Coffee. How did you settle on coffee, and how did you come up with the brand name, Twin Engine?
Well, you might think it's an easier question, but I wanted to do healthy baby food. Because I was in a lot of developing countries, and I was watching this trend of, as people went up in the middle class, they felt like they needed to buy jarred baby food, but they were just buying kind of a pretty low quality, and I thought it was the thing to do.
So I never noticed that baby food had a snob appeal to it till right now.
It does. A lot of things that we, in the U.S., that we don't realize has a huge snob appeal outside of the U.S.
We take for granted.
That we take for granted, and now it's like the snob appeal is doing everything natural, doing everything yourself, whereas, as middle classes start to evolve, it's like, no, they've got to start with that. So it's quite interesting about, like plastic diapers having very much a class snob appeal in other countries. And so Colin was like, that's going to be really complicated. Now we're talking about food safety issues, and there's not infrastructure, and thankfully and we wanted to work together, and so he has a natural professional palate as well. I'm a pretty good taster, but he really has a gift, and he didn't go to school for it. He's an economist.
I've got to meet this guy. I'd like to see somebody with a professional palate.
Completely different than me. Completely different personality. So anyhow, we were looking around, and coffee was something we could work together on. There was a clear opportunity to improve the quality and also create a completely new model. There was no roasted at the source, which 4 times faster poverty reduction, by the way. We talk about those numbers. But so for me, mission-wise, it was great, and it also didn't require refrigeration. A lot of risks that now, years into it, I'm thinking, oh man, that was smart.
You're not killing any babies with bad baby food.
Ooh, yeah, exactly. And now that I know about infrastructure and the challenges we were against that I didn't know anything about, it was probably the smartest thing we ever did.
But I'm sure you and Colin did a lot of research on where to move to. Nicaragua, that's where a market was that you thought was appetizing for both of you?
Well, that's where the raw products were. And
so coffee beans are produced in Nicaragua in a big way. So I asked you before we went on the air, you don't grow coffee, you source it direct from the farmer.
Right.
You actually go out and view the coffee beans.
Right, so
you select them.
Yeah, we work together all year round. I mean, so in coffee, people use words like direct and co-ops, but the reality is that the farmer is completely separated from where the coffee is. And maybe that would be here as well, but you're in the same country, right? You know, I think a U.S. farmer knows that, I'm growing this and it's going to add value where I live, and that's not what it's like. And coffee is more like fruits, like Baders or so. It's more like that because it's perennial, and it takes 3 years to get your first crop, and so for honestly, it's a very colonial model, and it would be the same way for cacao. So it's been going out raw. And so being able to work directly in country and we'd select really the pure quality, which is not what would be coming in on average to the U.S. in quality.
And you're dealing with how many growers? Your suppliers?
So just a few. They tend to be, we really need to think of it more like wine. So if you think about wine country, you would be in a particular part of, I would say France, but if you also want to talk about Missouri even, or California, and you would be growing different varietals on different parts, the soils. So in different parts of California, they would say, our wine is very different. So no, people aren't doing that in coffee. They were starting to talk about it, but they weren't actually doing that and then going defect free.
So I'm intrigued by this. So how many different varieties of coffee do you source?
So
that coffee bean, I didn't know there's so many different varieties.
Yeah, so we work exclusively with Arabica, Coffea Arabica, which was the heirloom in Ethiopia 2,000 years ago, and then Robusta was a varietal that was developed to live in harsh conditions. And so this is all up in the mountains. And so under that, I probably should know this trivia, but there's at least 20 varietals, and then you're talking about soils, which side of the lake, is it washed, is it fruit cured, is it aged? There's a lot going on.
So what about like with grapes? I know you get into a base versus acidic soil. Does that change the flavor of coffee also?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got about 1 million questions I could ask you
it's
about this.
It's fascinating. On the quality side, it's fascinating. And so what was really unfortunate for us is that U.S. #1 drinker in the world, pays the most for coffee, was still getting a mixed quality. Because what happens is that to get to the price point, that was kind of the average, what you see here, you take the highest quality, which just means it's perfect. It doesn't, they use fancy words, and then you start mixing in defects because that is cheaper and to the contract, right? Because if it needs to be a price on the shelf, those aren't, if you're paying $10 for a bag of coffee, those are not pure, what would be like pure defect-free.
So they're
coffees.
mixing in some inerts.
It's just like any other agriculture product, except what you can't see affects the way it tastes. And I haven't found a great example for the variation, because you could have 15 different, and it's just sorting. It's sorting from the picking, 20 steps all the way to the green coffee, sorting. And a wise farmer that I've been working with for a long time, you'd get along with him. He's a real innovator, and he and his brother, and he's like, look, there's a customer for every coffee, Andrea. I just want to let you know, all the way to the blackest molded, there's a customer for every coffee. And it does, 99.9%.
So there's no scraps, they're not throwing anything away?
Nothing. Except with the pulp, which we've turned into a tea.
I think my analogy would be, if you buy a bag of cottonseed here in the United States, most of it has 80% germ. So when DPL, Stoneville, they're mixing in a seed for the new variety, they know that they're blending in 20% of seed that may be split, cracked. So they're mixing that in. So what you're saying is that's how they cheapen it up. They're using probably a more expensive coffee with a cheaper coffee.
Right, and then that has a factorial number of combinations. So because there's two different types of defects. One is primary, which is just physical, which doesn't affect the taste, but it affects the look. And then there's the secondary, and I think I just said that backwards. Primary, taste, secondary is physical. So primary, you might not be able to see it, but over fermentation, you can taste it, or grassy, could have been impacted in various ways. I mean, it's a lot of different, but that bitter grassiness, I need to put sugar cream, that's not because of the coffee, it's because it has defects in it.
I'm gathering yours doesn't have defects in it. This is cream of the crop, prime time coffee.
Yeah, and so we decided, look, like there's plenty of that. We're not ever going to be your neighbor. We're saying we're redefining local coffee. And so we're going to have to work with the highest quality because people don't like to switch. It's very emotional, I've learned. I had no idea. I came into this as an economist. I thought, hey, y'all, look, everybody says we want better coffee, we want poverty reduction, we want all these things. And I was like, great, here's the deal. And they were like, oh yeah, but actually I like, and I'm like, what? So it was a shock. I have to say, that was probably my most naive moment.
You're absolutely right. I just became a coffee drinker like in the last year or two. I've always drank it, but not steady. I've just started drinking steady, but our 90-year-old lady up front, Lorraine G.
We had a little talk.
She's got to have a certain type of coffee or she's not very happy in the mornings.
Yeah, I mean, so my proudest moments are when somebody says to me, I really have been drinking, say, Folgers. I don't want to pick on them, largest company in the world, coffee company in the world, but I just can't drink it anymore after drinking yours. And the thing is that it's not about, I always have to compete, and I'm just we're a speck on the wall, but with Folgers. But it's really that you can feel better too, and then there's a lot going on, and in the coffee itself. So even if I always say we do the social work. The social impact, and social work means something different. We do that for free. Like we focus on coffee. I end up talking about the mission a lot, and Colin's like, no, you have to lead with quality, Andrea. And, but the challenge is that there's not a lot of knowledge about quality.
You're right.
And so trying to figure out what to talk about and what resonates and what people believe about roasting, which is not necessarily true. And so Twin Engine Coffee, the name came from, Colin had a pilot's license when he was younger. There was we'd traveled a lot, but we wanted to create a symbol of connection because we were going to move there, we were going to be right there, and if you wanted to know something about the coffee or what was going on, transparent. So also a little known fact, so our coffee comes through the FDA, not USDA clearance. And so that means we know exactly we went and picked up the coffee, we put it in the bag, and so there's nothing between you and.
This is a good point you're making right here. I'd like to talk about the supply chain. How far are the growers that you go select coffee beans from where you actually, I guess, roast? When you select the coffee beans, you bring it back. I guess the first step is roasting. Take us through that process. How far is your supply chain from the package?
So historically, what happens is that coffee is grown, the good stuff is grown way up high. Roads are awful. The plain was how you got there in the 50s after reforestation. And so the thing is that coffee is depulped, which means the fruit comes off in a mechanical way. If you think about a grape with a bigger seed. And so that has to go down to a flat, sunny area rapidly within a few hours. And so, back up. So you're taking the pulp off, then you are fermenting it, and that's just to get the sugars off the seed.
Are you getting it already processed like that?
So we're getting it dried.
Gotcha.
So dried.
Okay.
But historically, the farmer, once it was washed and fermented, which means the sugar, they would sell it wet to a large exporter because there's this other part of the process, which is called the beneficio in Spanish, but the mill. And so that's where they're doing the drying and then taking off, kind of like wheat milling. There's an outer shell. And so what was happening historically is that farmers they weren't able to do that all by themselves. And so they would lose ownership of their coffee, and that's shifted a lot. So in our case, we can buy directly from farmers. So we're in Leon, we roast in Leon, which is not at all where coffee grows. It's about 2 hours.
I called it Leon, sorry.
Oh yeah, well, you know. Yeah, other people would too. And so we're about 2 hours from there, and so we would, throughout the year, right now it's the harvest is about 45 days late this year, which is interesting. We had 2 back-to-back hurricanes. And so we go get the coffee directly from the producer that had control over it the entire time, and then we'd bring it back and roast. We use grain pro bags to hermetic storage to keep the moisture in. And so so let's see, long story short, so we're just, it's us and the farmer.
So you pay the farmer direct?
Yeah.
Which would never happen here in the U.S.
Right. Well, with corn.
Anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it also didn't happen there, and that's not the norm at all. In fact, what's interesting is a little known fact about Fair Trade Certified is that they require you to buy from a group. So the farmer has to be in a cooperative or some kind of group. And so we were really, for me, and this is where the farm girl part comes out, is working directly with farmers, because especially because, there was a big crisis, 2018 and this, and so you're in it together. I mean, ag loans are at 20%, if they're even available, the rain, I mean, there's no insurance, there's no safety net.
So you depend on them, they depend on you.
Yeah, and so one case, one farmer is, or 2 brothers larger. In another case, our Elefante is a Cup of Excellence winner. That's a small, where we've created an opportunity for them. And so the interesting thing is that where the farmer is, they're like our, they're friends, or people say partners. It's mostly because they're just not living with people. It's more like we just see ourselves the same. It's the people after that. So it's really the value chain of roasting and packaging in country, which has a big impact.
Let's back up. So you've got your supply of coffee beans. You went out and selected them yourself. Does the farmer deliver it to you?
No, I go get it.
You go get it?
Yeah.
So, and that's in 45 days from now? You're in the middle of it?
So we've been picking up. And then we'll end up with our last pickup around July. And
that'll sustain your production for the whole year?
Right, well, until about February. This was really off this year, and so we ran out of the honey coffee. There was a lot going on.
It's normally a good thing, but I can tell by the way you're acting, that's not a good thing.
Well, this is the thing about coffee. We thought it was a good thing too. It's like, but people, once they have the coffee, they want it, and they want it every day, and I get it, and me too. And so it was like, especially as a small company, trying to have different lines and dealing with packaging, and it's pretty challenging to have a lot of different SKUs. And so people really loved it. I mean, Elefante and Honey Bear are 2 reserves. I mean, all the coffees are great. The 2 reserves have a different kind of personality, and we ran out of them both, and we were really, right now we have a PO that we're knocking on the door. I mean, I have some really good stories, because farmers there are also just huffing and puffing trying to make it go, so sometimes you gotta track them down.
We're gonna try them all after we go off the air. We're gonna get jacked up on coffee, because it seems like it's the pure stuff. But I wanna get back to the supply chain, because a lot of people are coffee drinkers, but they don't realize what goes into putting coffee on the shelf. So you get it, do you immediately roast it? Do you store it for 6 months?
So in hermetic storage, and we're using it throughout the year.
So it actually, the raw product that you get from the farmer, it actually has shelf life?
Oh yeah.
It'll last for, you ran out, so you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, the studies on grain pro bags are 2 years of holding it stable, as long as you don't. I actually knew about them from work in Kenya. They were developed to avoid aflatoxins in corn.
So when you do a production run, then you pull a certain coffee bean out, or you're blending coffee beans together. I mean, is this one coffee bean in this bag, or are you blending some together to make your blend?
In the espresso, it's 2 farms and 2 different curing styles.
So when you do a run, how long's the run? Like when you're making this one, how long does it take you to make it? How big's your factory? People would want to know that.
So we just literally, it's a whole nother long story of what it's like trying to do these things in a country without infrastructure that you might be used to. So we had to build our own roasters, and we roasted on 2 10-pound or 12-pound green. You lose about 20% in the roasting until last week, or 2 weeks ago. And I took delivery of a 100-pound roaster, which is a huge difference for us, but we were able to do pretty well on it. And so we would get an order, And we just started, well, I guess it's been a couple years now. We're distributed by Frontier Natural Foods Co-op, which is out of Iowa, and they're national distributors. And so they would send us a PO, and we would just go for it. And we had more orders coming in locally pre-2018 crisis, but yeah. So the size-wise, we would we were pretty nimble because we had this small roaster, and so we could do.
You can
that.
actually fill orders on demand. Then you don't have to keep a lot of inventory.
Right, which is what we did. And this is kind of where, Colin and I, which is the constant. So if you went to a grocery store, the industry norm is a year, and people have been told, oh, fresh and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of those things don't take into consideration the handling of the coffee prior to roast, which has a huge impact on how long it stays. Mm-hmm. I bet there's a seed equivalent to this. And as well as the packaging and how you keep it throughout the supply chain. And I completely stand behind the year, if not more, because I have people coming back to me and they're like, I'm worried about doing everything on demand. They're like, yeah, I've had this coffee in my pantry for 2 years and I just took it out and it's the best. I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
But it sounds like it's so pure though, it's just kind of aging and getting better.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely holds, and I've been surprised.
You're making me think I've never drank real coffee, but we're going to try all these when we get off the show here, but I can't wait to try them.
And you should be able to, if you prefer a Merlot or Cabernet, as long as you're comparing, hold the other things constant, then compare them and like them. I expect some people to be like, oh, I like this way, much better.
You're in Leon, Nicaragua, right? Mm-hmm. What did you do to change the complexion of the coffee industry there? Because was there resentment when you came? Like this gringo's coming in, taking over our coffee?
Well, I did not realize the incredible history with the region and the U.S. I didn't realize how much was assumed that I was really wealthy, which I wasn't. It was very bootstrapping, mm-hmm. Getting going. And so locally, it's, I don't know, you look at different sources, let's say 50% unemployment in a place where the, minimum wage is somewhere around $250 depending a month, $250 a month. And so when we started hiring people, we were very well received. It's just that the different classes, et cetera. So we didn't realize how hard it would be because farmers were used to exporting everything and selling in container quantities. And so really having to suss that out was pretty challenging. I did it all myself. This was not like, I hired a lawyer. And so I just went trial by fire. I got all of our paperwork, and there's a million stories there.
How many people do you employ?
So we also had a big construction project. I would say at the height of the construction that it was like 25 direct families being impacted, and so that's the big difference. So these jobs never existed. So none of this existed, this idea of adding value. There's coffee companies mm-hmm. there, but it was really one of the earliest brands that said, no, we're going to work with only the pure specialty quality, and we're going to do everything here. And so just this idea that there was so much trauma of having like a low quality product in country and then mm-hmm. exporting the best stuff, that people didn't believe us. And so that was a big thing. Like, no, that's the same, whether you're buying it in Malden, St. Louis, or Leon, Nicaragua, it's the same coffee. And there's a million impact stories here, and they're beautiful, but giving people access to the best of their own country was a really new thing. And so there's a lot of assumptions that I didn't know anything about, and so we just, I try to ignore them along the way.
So you truly were thinking local but acting globally. That's kind of a saying we use when we talk about value added here in the U.S. Think local but act global, and you're doing that with Twin Engine Coffee. I really admire you for that.
Thank you. This
is a great success story. We're proud of you here in Southeast Missouri. It's an exciting story, and the story continues, right? Yeah,
and the U.S. has become our main market post a crisis. So we were about 50-50 national and exporting, and now we're doing mostly export. And so it's been really exciting. We've been received well.
Well, Andrea, thank you for coming, but I have to ask you one last question before we go try all this coffee. We probably don't even brew it right here. You're probably going to show us a new way to brew coffee, but where can someone watching the show support your company and support you and your husband's business, where can we get Twin Engine Coffee at?
You can find it online. I mean, if we're in the Boot Hill, because I don't have any retailers here, although I'd be happy to. www.twinenginecoffee.com.
www.twinenginecoffee.com.
Yep.
I think you're going to sell a bunch. It sounds like you already are,
I
but
hope so.
everybody can always use more sales, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Andrea, it was exciting to finally have you on the show.
Well,
Great
thanks.
banter with you.
Really
Hope you come back
appreciate it.
sometime.
Thank you.
I got a feeling there'll be some new adventures for Andrea Woolverton in the future.
I hope
Thank you.
so. Thank
Thank
you.
you.